This video was brought to you by CuriosityStream. When it comes to porn, you might assume that lots of people have control over what you can see. The government, the sites hosting it, the actors taking part in it, and potentially even your parents' pesky filters. However, it turns out that in most countries, the government takes a surprisingly hands-off approach when it comes to porn. And even the countries that do want to regulate it quickly find themselves running into privacy issues or just realizing that it's basically impossible to clamp down on porn in one country on a very global internet. So with governments essentially unable to effectively regulate adult material, you might assume that no one can censor porn. No one could, say, make a list of what kind of porn is and isn't allowed and force everyone worldwide to follow it, right? Well, the thing is that it turns out that list does exist, and someone surprising wields this power over porn. More specifically, two very powerful companies. Now, these businesses aren't elected, they aren't accountable to anyone, and to be honest, they don't even necessarily want all this power. So let's get into who these two companies are, and what they have on their list of porn that you just can't make. Now, before we get too deep into this video, a warning. The version of this video you're watching right now, the one on YouTube, is quite heavily censored. It turns out that YouTube is another company who likes to limit their creators, and as such, talking about this kind of stuff leaves you liable to demonetization and algorithmic issues. So if talking about porn generally is an issue on YouTube, they're not going to like it if we talked about or as such, we've had to cut some sections of this video to make it work for YouTube. But if you want the full uncensored version of this video, then you can watch it over on Nebula. Not only is it longer and uncut over there, but like all of our videos on Nebula, there's no ads. Not even this one. So the question is, how much would you be willing to pay for a ton of exclusive TLDR videos, ad-free viewing, an unedited version of this video, and early access to all of these TLDR business videos? Well, how does less than $15 a year sound? No, really. That's because we've done a deal with CuriosityStream. So if you sign up to their superb service, where you'll find tons of high-quality documentaries, you'll also get Nebula, our streaming service, totally free. That means if you sign up using our link, you'll get both services for just over $1 a month. A crazy good deal. Like every industry, power in porn ultimately comes down to money. And that's because porn on the internet is funded through one of two business models: tube sites and pay-to-access sites. Now, the business model of the latter is easier to understand. People are directly paying for the sites and then trying to hide these transactions from their girlfriends. But the free sites also rely on people paying for porn. That's because even if you're accessing the content for free, these sites are full of ads and pop-ups telling you about other paid sites or hot girls in your area. In fact, a lot of the free tube sites also own paid sites, using their free content as a gateway to the paid stuff. Either way, both business models are reliant on someone, somewhere, actually paying for porn. Now, when you pay someone online, most people assume it's just a case of telling your bank to transfer funds to the company you're paying. But it's not quite that simple. That's because 72% of all credit card transactions go through one of two payment providers: Visa and MasterCard. These companies essentially act as a bridge between you and the seller, and controlling a gateway like this gives the companies a whole lot of influence. It's not only influence that these companies get from controlling transactions, they also scoop up a ton of money. That's the reason they've stuck with risky industries like porn for so long. Adult content might have the potential to damage their reputation, but because of this, they can also charge them more money, making higher fees and scoring bigger profit margins. And this was a relatively comfortable relationship between the two sides for a number of years. Visa and MasterCard tolerated porn in return for higher margins, and porn tolerated the higher fees because, well, they just didn't have much choice. But this balance wasn't going to last forever, and you might even remember when things came crashing down. In December 2020, Nicholas Kristof wrote a piece in the New York Times called The Children of Pornhub, which outlined the impacts of sites like Pornhub and painted them as full of and Now, this report is kind of contentious, so we're not going to get into the debate around its accuracy. But the general gist of the article did seem to ring true. True enough, at least, to spook a number of powerful people, including activist investor Bill Ackman. Now, as an activist investor, Ackman is used to getting things done and forcing CEOs to bend to his will. So when he read this piece and took a dislike to the porn industry, he took direct action, immediately texting MasterCard's chief executive, AJ Banger. And as a result, MasterCard promptly launched an investigation, which found that unlawful content was being hosted on Pornhub. And as such, the payment provider banned the use of their cards on Pornhub's site, with Visa quickly following suit, effectively cutting off about half of MindGeek, Pornhub's parent company's revenue overnight. Now, you might be wondering how Visa and MasterCard pulling their cards from a free site could have such a big impact. Most users don't use their credit card on Pornhub anyway. Well, there are actually 3 reasons this had such a big impact. Firstly, many tube sites, including Pornhub, do have a premium tier, which charges users. Secondly, some of their advertisers use credit cards to pay the tube sites. And thirdly, even advertisers that don't use Visa and MasterCard to pay the tube sites very often fall under the card provider's jurisdiction themselves. So when Visa and MasterCard pulled service from Pornhub, many advertisers quickly got cold feet about working with them and decided that they didn't want to risk the wrath of the payment gods too. Now, you can imagine how this was a pivotal moment for Pornhub and their owners MindGeek. In a matter of days, their whole business model had collapsed, with MasterCard and Visa's decisions fundamentally changing their business. So they realized they needed to act fast if they wanted to save their company. And as such, Pornhub took the drastic decision to remove millions of videos from their site, going from 13 million videos to just 4. One of the biggest content takedowns in media history, with the site removing all of their user-generated content overnight, allowing them to better control the studio-produced content which remained. Now, this was the first time that we really saw banks and payment companies take an active role in regulating porn, but it wasn't their first time. In fact, for years, they've been working in the background to control what can and cannot be sold on their networks, which effectively also means what porn can and can't be made. Because if you can't sell it, then why make it? And this sort of makes sense. There's certain things it's unsurprising you're not allowed to put on your credit card. But what's perhaps more surprising is that these companies don't have particularly clear guidelines on this issue. For instance, MasterCard's core set of rules is 436 pages long, but of those endless rules, only one refers to porn. Rule 5.12.7.2 within the illegal and brand-damaging transactions section of the rulebook outlines the sale of images or services which are patently offensive or lack seriously artistic value. They then go on to explicitly ban content involving minors, non-consensual content, bestiality, and content containing mutilation. And that's it. That handful of rules is all the payment providers give porn studios to work with. And if those rules aren't vague and confusing enough, MasterCard throws in one more provision to cover their backs. They also don't allow any material which MasterCard might find unacceptable in the future. Clear, right? So they hand down these vague guidelines from on high, and then studios and creators have to decide what they can and can't make in order to avoid the wrath of the payment providers. Now, the job of untangling these rules is so complex that it leads to rumors and conspiracies within the industry. And whole companies like Mobius Pay exist to help them navigate and even understand these rules. Their entire job is to help companies work out where their content falls on this spectrum, helping them to avoid things which are legal but somehow fall foul of the payment provider's rules. Now, the Financial Times was able to get hold of one of Mobius Pay's best practice documents, and the list is enlightening. The document, which is only a page long itself, was, in the words of the FT, packed with unacceptable terms, definitions of extreme content, and bans on everything from to depictions of harm, implied and but other acts are also not advised. Things like hypnosis, sex with someone who appears to be asleep, or even the mention of periods or menstruation. The page even advised against problematic words like twink, nymph, nymphette, teen, or any racial slurs or symbols, all of which can cause problems with banks. And this informal list of what is and isn't allowed is never static itself. Acts and words come on and off of this list, with once being very limited but becoming more acceptable in recent years, with the FT's report suggesting that news events around 2016 helped to normalize the idea and make it more acceptable. And the payment providers take this seriously. When issues are reported to payment providers, they have whole teams worth of people to review companies' accounts, and when necessary, ban accounts immediately and permanently. It's not even just this explicit regulation or censorship either. There's inevitably self-censorship going on as well, with studios sometimes unwilling to go too near the guardrails out of fear that they'll get banned. And this ambiguity even gives the payment processors more power, effectively allowing them to act unchecked, banning content which is legal but falls foul of their very vague terms and conditions. But that doesn't mean that Visa and MasterCard want this power. They have a lot of responsibility here, as do the banks and advisors they work with. Sometimes they have to find and sanction actively illegal content, but often it's more in the grey moral area. The big question here then is, should the free market and big business get to determine what kind of grey content they're happy with? Or should it be left to the state to more clearly regulate what is and isn't allowed? Like I said at the start of this video, if you want more from TLDR, then be sure to subscribe and check us out on Nebula, the streaming service which we made with our creator friends and where you can find exclusive and uncensored TLDR videos, which will never make it to YouTube. Plus, early access to all of our first TLDR business videos right now. Although I don't think we'll be engaging on any hypnosis over on Nebula either.